Hi, my name's Brad Young. Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Today is episode 14. It's amazing we've already got that many episodes published, but this is episode 14, heart rate training. We're going to look at marathon and ultra marathon training, but the principles you can utilize no matter, what kind of running you're doing, you can utilize the same principles. I mean, all you have to do is adjust your training methods to train for different types of events, but this can help you even with your military PT test or anything, because what we're going to do is we're going to learn all about heart rate training today and why it's so important, and how it can really help your baseline endurance, which can improve your speed, etc. And so when we look at heart rate training could be the game changer that's in your future. I mean, heart rate training, it's not about running, it's about running smarter. It's about knowing your body and unleashing your full potential. When you've been hitting a wall, progress may seem out of reach. The truth is, with focused heart rate training, you can break through those things because you understand your body's rhythm, you optimize your steps, and you reach the finish line stronger because you're pacing yourself right. That's where, so many people get off is they don't pace right. And when you get into these different zones, you're burning more calories. You're pushing your heart harder, your body harder, and so you tire out more quickly, or they don't start and build a good baseline to be able to train for these events. But just like any other event, you got to have a baseline. And so when you think about endurance running, your heart rate is not just a number; it's the guiding compass to seeking your peak performance. You got to know your numbers. Whether you're chasing your first marathon or tackling an ultra, which is really rough. This is your opportunity to train with purpose, run with determination, and achieve what you want. And, I utilize heart rate training. I started utilizing heart rate training several years ago when I was struggling. I had COVID and some other things that really had messed my lungs up. And on top of already having sleep apnea, which running has helped improve it down to mild. And and essentially, the type of sleep apnea I have is something you can't even control. So it doesn't matter whether I weigh, 200 or 100 pounds. It doesn't matter. But it's something that heart rate training, running has really made a difference in, and it's helped me get better. And I'd had a surgery and had all these things happening, and my baseline was low, and I just had forgotten what I already knew. And that happens, and that's why I like to share stuff on the Peak Performance Podcast, because it gives you some insight, and so essentially, I stopped using what I already knew. And so once I got back to my roots and understood heart rate training, what I needed to do to build everything up, get the right shoes, make sure you're training smarter and quit getting shin splints, because all those things happen. I mean, I got the wrong shoes, and had just terrible, terrible shin splints. I mean, horrible ones. And I started doing some ice baths, and that wasn't even helping enough because everything was wrong. And so when I started researching to write my 52 books for 2024, I wrote 52 books, and several of them were on sports training, elite athletes, and things like that. And that's where I made sure to share the information about heart rate training. But now what we're going to look at today is going to be the basics of heart rate training. So here's the zones, and here's the significance, and this is why you need to know this. So zone 1 is really, really light. It's ideal for recovery and warm up. It's how you would warm up. Obviously zone 5 is going to be your maximum effort. It's going to be sprinting. All right. You're going to do a lot of training in zone 2, and that's for building endurance and aerobic capacity. And it looks and feels like almost like you're barely moving, like you're just kind of running in place almost, but it really builds up over time. I mean, it's something you have to give time on. But, when I'm running in zone 2, my heart rate starts going down a lot of times. I mean, the longer I do it, it starts going down. And so I have to run a little bit harder to increase my heart rate to stay in that zone 2, because my body adapts. And your body adapts in different ways, and you got to understand your body as you get going because of all the pacing issues and things like that. So zone 3 is going to be moderate. And so that's going to enhance your cardiovascular efficiency and your stamina. So zone 3 is going to be a little bit harder. You're barely going to be able to talk in zone 3. It's kind of you're almost to that out of breath point, where zone 4, you're right there. In zone 5, you're definitely out of breath. And so, there's going to be different training zones you're going to be utilizing, but a lot of them are going to be in that zone 2 area. But so, all right, so here's how you determine this. And I'm going to do myself just to make it easy. All right, so to calculate your maximum heart rate and your resting heart rate, you calculate your maximum heart rate by subtracting 220 from your age. So I do that, and since I'm 47 years old, that's 173. So that's my max heart rate. That's very hard. 173 is very hard for me. All right, you measure your heart rate by counting your heartbeats per minute. All right, my heartbeats per minute are usually 58 or so, depending on the day. Sometimes it's a little lower, sometimes a little higher, but it's right in that general area. And then you use the values to determine your heart rate zones. And so when I calculate my heart rate zones, zone 1 is 118 to 127. Zone 2 is 128 to 139. Zone 3 is 140 to 151. Zone 4 is 152 to 162. And then very hard, zone 5 is 163 to 173. So 173 is my max. And so you just determine it, it's determined by your age. And so just go in there and figure that out. And just, when you think about it, your steady pace, my 128 to 139 is zone 2. That's not a bad pace at all, and it starts going up the longer I run. So, as we train for this peak performance, like I said, I've got a lot more training to do, and I really want to do, but I'm probably not going to be able to make this next one like I want to. We're going to try to pull out all the stops. We'll see how it works out, because again, you don't want to get hurt, And remember, there in the podcast description, there's a link to where you can calculate all these things yourself. You'll have the information here. You can do all these things yourself, because the Peak Performance Podcast is about practical application. Everything I do is about practically applying, and I do these things. I do the things that we talk about. And so, when you look at tools and technology, obviously you got heart rate monitors, which the chest straps seem to be more accurate, but you've got your wrist devices, like your smart watches and things like that, and you have fitness apps that sync with your wearable devices. You have smart watches, obviously, and there's online platforms you can analyze your heart data rate with, and understand your training progress a little bit better. But most of the time you can calculate that, and you follow a training plan, you'll come out on top. But the benefits of heart rate training for any kind of endurance athlete, I mean, obviously it's improved cardiovascular efficiency and your stamina goes up. You can better identify optimal training intensity. You can tell it because you know by your heart rate. You're going to know where know what zone you're at. So you're going to know how hard you're pushing yourself and whether you're going to be able to, maintain it. You can enhance your recovery by monitoring your effort levels. And it also helps reduce the risk of overtraining or injury, because you're monitoring this. You're staying right where you need to be. And so the marathon training, the hard zones, I mean, when you do that, you have to determine your max heart rate. You have to identify it. You got to structure a workout to be able to do this. And then you got to monitor yourself. And so we're going to go back to what I was talking about. So when you start building your aerobic base, you got to spend more time in zone 2. That's going to build that aerobic base. And I mean, you're not moving that fast in zone 2, but you know what? You're going to be less likely to get hurt too in zone 2. You're not pushing yourself, but you're building that aerobic base. And then you go to tempo runs when you go into zone 3, and that helps your lactate threshold. So that lactic acid builds up. This helps you tolerate it. You go back and forth. So there's different, training techniques that you'll have to experiment with, read about, understand more. But, this is going to give you some foundational understanding. And so you can use intervals in zone 4 and 5 to boost your speed and your anaerobic activity and capacity. So, when you do intervals and you go up, I mean, sometimes you go from zone 2 to zone 5, back to zone 2. And then you switch zones around. It just depends on your training plan and what you're doing. I mean, like I said, you can utilize this information, for whatever you're training for. I mean, if you're training for a 3-mile Marine Corps test, you know what, you can utilize it, because you've got to build your base up. You've got to understand your body. And while you can run 3 miles, getting to that 18-minute mark is going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of work to get to that 18-minute mark for most people. I mean, that's 6 miles an hour. I mean, I'm sorry, it's 6 minute miles for, 3 straight miles. So, I mean, 18 minutes, that's a pretty fast 5K right there. So you're really close on that. So, all these things can help. So, I mean, when you incorporate interval training and tempo runs, it helps your speed and your efficiency. And it's where you build it up. So if you're doing a shorter distance, you can do that. But, you do interval sessions once or twice a week to make sure you don't overtrain. You gradually increase the intensity and duration of your tempo runs. And so it's slow. It's kind of like, it's kind of like your car, when it's really cold outside, let it warm up. You kind of, you don't go out and just gun it as soon as you back out of your driveway. You're easy on it. That's kind of the same thing. You got to be easy, because it's your body. And so as you gradually increase all this stuff, you make sure you're obviously you're cooling down right, you're warming up right, and you alternate training days because you got to put recovery in there. And then when you look at recovery runs and you monitor your heart rate, you got to understand your fatigue. You got to schedule at least one full rest day every week. You got to pay attention to your hydration and nutrition because that's going to be key right there, is being able to have that hydration and nutrition together. Because just like me, I mean, I'm 205 pounds. I mean, I need a lot of calories a day. And so the more I'm running, the more calories I need. And so you got to pay attention, make sure you get enough water because, even with some of the techniques you can use, there's different supplements you can take to make you hold more water and things like that. You can still goof that up because I promise you I did. And, it's not fun. It's not fun, but make sure you're using foam rollers. Make sure you're stretching to alleviate muscle soreness. Make sure you're tracking your sleeping patterns to understand and make sure you're recovering, because if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. And I'm going to look at some ultra marathon training strategies. There's differences, because you got to focus on building the endurance over longer distances. Because I mean, an ultra is going to be anything over a marathon distance. So I mean, be 100 miles, 50 miles, 200 miles. I mean, so you got to really plan this stuff. You don't accidentally do these things. So you got to build that endurance. You got to incorporate back-to-back long runs to simulate race fatigue. And in one that I read by one of the greatest ultra runners in the world, that was one of the things that, I mean, when you're building up, I mean, it's over months and months. And I mean, there was some marathonish, like marathon long back-to-back runs at the end. And I mean, you're doing these back-to-back days. And so building your body up and callousing it to be able to do that, there's a lot of work involved right there. And so that's where the strategy comes in. That's why, you've got to understand your basic stuff and apply it, and then work on your strategy to be able to actually do that. You need to be training on terrain that's similar to the course. If it's uneven, make sure you're running where there's elevation changes. If it's flat, make sure you're using flat. Make sure your body's adjusted to it. I mean, because you've got to understand that. You've got to understand your fueling strategies. You got to understand, just like your car needs gas, you got to have fuel, and you got to make sure you're eating your gels, you're drinking everything at the right times, because the last thing you want to do is cramp up or get just too fatigued, because you're going to be tired, you're going to be fatigued, it's going to suck. I mean, I run some really long distances now, and I mean, just training up through the hills, I promise. I mean, if I don't have enough food, I don't have everything just right. I mean, it really, really, really sucks. So you got to really plan this stuff out. It's like I told somebody I have water bottles between my house and the other side of a city called Medina that's roughly 6 miles from my house, and I've got water bottles from my house all the way there to the other side of the city and all the way back, so I can get them at any time, because you never know when you're going to need it. So try to plan it and be able to think about that just in case, and because it's going to be there's a lot of mental resilience is going to be involved, and you got to be able to visualize seeing yourself achieving this thing. But you can use your heart rate training to manage your pace. If you monitor your heart rate, you want to stay within that target zone. You got to adjust your pace based on real-time heart rate feedback. If you're running too hot, you're going to get tired more quickly. Obviously, you're going to burn out more quickly. So you got to use those zones to prevent overtraining, manage your recovery, but then understand where you're at during these long runs, because as soon as you start getting off, and all of a sudden, let's say your heart rate shoots up to 150. I mean, you're up in a complete different zone, so your body's doing different things, and it's gonna fatigue you much more quickly. And so you got to get your body trained to where it stays down into the right zones. But if you incorporate these long runs in, you focus on building that aerobic base. I mean, through consistent mileage. Obviously you're going to be doing a lot of stretching, using foam rollers. Things like your red light therapy help, like ice baths, all those things. Make sure you prioritizing your hydration and nutrition. I mean, I've talked to some runners, and they tell me how far they've run based on how many gels they've eaten. And I mean, after a while, you got to actually eat something though. You can't. It's hard to just continue on just with nothing but gels. I mean, after so much time. I mean, I bring bananas and all kinds of things with me, but you got to practice your fueling. You got to make sure you're mixing carbohydrates, electrolytes, and fluids to be able to do that. I mean, I drink my Huel training and I water it down some, and there's it's a food, and so it's it goes well. It absorbs quickly, and that's why I like it. It absorbs quickly into my body, and so I'm able to continue to go. And this is what we have to do though to go after peak performance. And so I'm gonna report the results of my heart rate training. I'm gonna update it within the podcast. So I'm gonna continue to update these things and in episodes as we go further and update my progress and what I did. And I'd love it, people do the same thing. But you got to avoid trying new foods on race day, because it can cause real problems like cramps and diarrhea and all kinds of things like that. So, make sure you stick with what you've been eating. Don't get, let's just be smart, train smarter, and but just make sure you're carrying everything with you during training as well. I mean, you need a belt. I mean, I have a pack and everything else to make sure. And I mean, and it's what everybody needs to do. And so, common challenges, I mean, you're going to be managing your overtraining and burnout. You got to monitor your heart rate. You got to incorporate those rest days. You got to adjust your intensity. I mean, if your heart rate's elevated, you've got to slow down. I mean, even if it's going to make you take an extra 30 minutes, you still got to slow down, because you've got to focus on keeping in that heart rate zone that you're training in that day. You don't want to get out of that. You want to stay where you're at. Make sure you're doing it. Make sure you're adjusting your heart rate for different weather and terrain. That's like when I'm running up hills, I have to change my zones. When you're running hills, good luck staying in zone 2. I mean, when you're running big hills, I mean, it's very challenging. So you have to work on that. You have to really work hard to be able to stay in that zone 2. And so it makes it more challenging. So you got to understand that. But we can go and break through our plateaus. We just got to focus on it. Keep focus on what we're doing, because heart rate training allows you to optimize your performance within the specific heart rate zones. I mean, overtraining can be avoided if you monitor these things. Make sure you're resting. Emphasize recovery, sleep, nutrition. Make sure you understand the environmental factors, because anything cold, heat, anything can cause you have to make adjustments to your heart rate training strategies, your pacing. Make sure you got your proper hydration, because I mean, if you're running, it's 100 degrees. They wouldn't let me do a 24-hour race. I think it was year before last or last. I think it was year before last, but they canceled it because of heat. I mean, it was in August, a 24-hour race in Jackson, Mississippi. Yeah, no kidding, it's going to be hot. Well, what are you expecting? It's the end of August in Jackson, Mississippi. It's going to be hot. But they literally canceled it, so I wasn't happy about that. But if you do this consistently, you'll be able to improve yourself so much. And then, like I said, you can adjust the pacing strategies for your mileage, for all your PT tests and stuff. And so the workbook that I've included in the link, it's going to have your baseline assessment. You have goal setting, be a weekly training program in there to where you can write in what you're doing. it's just a sample, but it just gives you an idea. Obviously, you got to modify it yourself. You got to come up with more of it yourself. This is just a way to get ideas, a way to track your progress. There's a checklist in there for preparation, things like that. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's up to you. But I'm giving you the tools to be able to just go ahead and evaluate yourself, because sometimes when you write everything down and you evaluate yourself, you find out way more than you know looking at whatever your app says, or looking at whatever you're measured by. You got to look at it yourself and see how you feel, how you're adjusting, and adapt based on feel along with all those things. But anyway, my name's Brad Young, and this has been the Peak Performance Podcast. Have a great day. Thanks.